Good evening and welcome. To start, I would like to introduce the candidates and then go over some rules. On the audience's far left, we have Melody Oldred. Beside her, we have Matthew Chambers, Wendy Martin, and Dave Mckenzie. All candidates will have 3 minutes of opening remarks. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, they will hear a bell. Hit that bell. Okay. That way they know they have 30 seconds to start winding things down. We have a list of 11 questions to ask each candidate. They will each have 2 minutes to respond. After 1 minute and 30 seconds, they will hear the bell. That way they know they have 30 seconds to wind it down. At the end of it, they will have 2 minutes for closing remarks, and at 1 minute 30, they'll hear.
We're getting there.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is, as we ask the questions, we're going to start with the number one, which is on the audience's far left. They will start, and then as we work through, number two will answer question 2 first, number 3 answer question 3 first, and so on and so forth until we get through it. If we get through it and we hold a good time, the floor will be opened up for the audience to ask the candidates questions as well. Any questions or concerns? Okay, let's begin. Candidate number 1. Melody, go ahead.
Do you want me to talk in the
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I didn't know if I was going to share. All right, thank you. Great. Good. Hi, everyone. Can you hear? Is this good? You can hear me. Good. So as you know, I'm Melody Alder with the Christian Heritage Party, and the CHP is Canada's only pro-life, pro-biblical values federal party that endorses the Judeo-Christian principles enshrined in the Canadian Constitution. Canada was founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God, capital G, the God of the Bible, and the rule of law. We choose the name Christian Heritage to illuminate the fact that lying at the very heart and soul and identity of our nation's foundation is our Christian heritage, our greatest national treasure, waiting to be awakened and revitalized for such a time as this. The Christian worldview is common to all Western countries where the laws in society are founded on biblical values. Now more than ever, we see the great need for a national party that encourages Canadians to put forward the biblical perspectives upon which Canada was founded, and indeed Western civilization itself. So our campaign theme is life, family, and freedom. CHP is Canada's only united federal party committed to the defense of innocent human life from conception to natural death for over 30 years now. How we treat our most vulnerable is the best measure of a society. And family. Family is the building block of a well-ordered, healthy society. CHP is committed to the restoration and protection of the natural family. Traditional marriage between one man and one woman as the centerpiece of family life, and the family is the source and training ground for every productive citizen. And yes, freedom. Freedom is essential for maintaining our God-given rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom to raise our children. Freedom is essential. CHP has policies on other matters too, all of them: economics, trade, jobs, Aboriginal affairs, independent energy, environmental protection, foreign affairs, just to name a few. We believe that these topics can only be handled properly when critical issues of life, family, and freedom are addressed. For that reason, life, family, and freedom have become our campaign theme. I hope you will share our vision as we work to restore righteousness, common sense, and prosperity in a free and democratic Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. Candidate number 2.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us here today. I want to start by saying it's been an incredible couple weeks of door knocking. I've had the opportunity to speak to many people in our community, and I'm ready and excited to serve Oxford County in Parliament, and I think people here are ready for change. This election is about priorities. People are worried about the cost of living, housing, phone and medical bills, all things that add up for families who haven't gotten a real raise in years. And we're facing serious national issues: housing, climate, medication, that both Liberals and Conservatives have done not enough on. The Liberals made some big promises in 2015, and Canadians haven't got the real change that they were promised. They're disappointed by the Liberals not making life more affordable, making decisions that help big corporations, not people they are supposed to represent. And at the end of 4 years in power, young people are still struggling to pay their education and move into their first homes. Wealthy corporations are still getting put ahead of ordinary working people. And kids are still growing up in unsafe, overcrowded homes and schools. Justin Trudeau was even found guilty of breaking Canada's conflict of interest laws twice. For the first time, any Canadian Prime Minister has been caught doing that. Excuse me. And we are still far from meeting our Paris Climate Accord agreement goals. The Conservatives, they're offering the same old tired ideas that led Canada into a period of social and economic stagnation. They talk a big game about making life more affordable, but at the end of the day, they're going to put their cuts ahead of families, just like Doug Ford is doing here in Ontario. You Democrats are in it for you. We are on the side of working Canadians, not big corporations and lobbyists. We know that Canadians want more affordable lives, services like universal Pharmacare, and actions on the big issues that face everyday Canadians. We are going to bring in universal Pharmacare and dental care. We are going to save families over $1,000 every year on their phone and hydro bills. We are going to stop profiting off our young people's student loans and and work to make sure that cost is never a barrier for any bright young student who wants to work hard. That's why we are going to push for a bold action on climate change that creates over 300,000 new jobs and leaves no community behind. That's why we are fighting for you in Ottawa. No matter what happens this election, a strong team of New Democrats can make all the difference for you and your family. That's why I'm asking you to send me to fight for you in Ottawa to make real change in our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Candidate number 3.
Hello, and thank you all for coming this evening. I appreciate seeing so many nice faces out there. My name is Wendy Martin, and I am the People's Party of Canada candidate in Oxford. I am a proud Canadian. Our platform is the only one that talks about guaranteeing your constitutional rights and freedoms. Our plan is to protect and promote the unique country of Canada for all our citizens. A nation must be based on a sense of belonging, of participating in a common national project and sharing the same values. In a free society, immigrants have the right to cherish and maintain their cultural heritage. However, that doesn't mean we have the obligation to help them preserve it with government programs and taxpayers' money. The vast majority of Canadians rightly expect them to learn about our history and culture, master one of our official languages, and adopt the widely shared Canadian values. Our party does not promise massive public spending on a national Pharmacare program. Instead, we do recognize that the health care is an exclusive provincial responsibility. It is up to the provinces to develop cost-effective universal systems. We must end the current confusion over who does what and who is responsible for health care. Supply management is a government-imposed cartel that keeps the prices of dairy, poultry, and eggs artificially high through the control of production, the banning of imports, price fixing, and the reduction of competition in the market. Our ability to negotiate fair trade deals with other countries is hurt by supply management. This hurts other parts of the economy by limiting economic growth and job creation. It is an undisputed fact that the world's climate is changing and has always changed and will continue to change. However, the policy debate about global warming is not grounded in science anymore. It is based on massive fear. So our platform recognizes that climate changes. We need to set an example for other countries to follow by implementing practical solutions to make Canada's air, water, and soil cleaner, including bringing clean drinking water to remote First Nations communities. The entire platform for the People's Party of Canada is online, and I urge you to read it if you decide what kind of Canada you want now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Candidate number 4.
Well, thank you for being here this evening, and thanks to the other candidates for taking part in tonight's session also. My name is Dave Mckenzie. I'm the candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. Our Conservative campaign is based on a commitment of for you to get ahead. Some of our agenda includes eliminating GST and home heating bills, scrapping the carbon tax, making parental EI benefits tax-free, lowering personal taxes, attracting better, higher-paying jobs, implementing a children's fitness tax credit, implementing a children's arts and learning tax credit, and boosting the RESP. Now, I know other leaders talk about our planned cuts to help pay for our platform. So that you're not surprised, the things we will cut: corporate welfare payments to mega corporations, such as the $12 million to Loblaws for new refrigerators, $256 million to the Asian Infrastructure Bank to build roads and bridges overseas, $215,000 for the Prime Minister to take a vacation in the Bahamas, and $155,000 for a red leather couch in Ottawa. Ladies and gentlemen, this election is important for all of us in this room, but even more so for our future generations. We can no longer live on credit cards that we cannot afford to pay. Andrew Scheer and nor Dave Mckenzie do not live this way, and no longer can the Government of Canada live this way. I ask you to support Andrew Scheer and vote Dave Mckenzie on October the 21st.
Thank you.
Can you pass the mic back down the middle?
Okay, thank you, candidates. Now we'll get into tonight's questions. Question number 1, we'll be starting with candidate Melody Eldred. What do you see as Canada's role in combating human trafficking, also known as modern-day slavery?
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone approves of this extreme form of violence against women and girls. The coercion of a girl or woman to engage in sex for financial gain or another is nothing less than violent, a form of abuse that must not be tolerated. It is a human rights violation. Some of the suggestions that we have would be a 5-year strategy for this abhorrent crime, financial support for anti-trafficking efforts, promotion of a collective action approach with many important stakeholders, sharing of knowledge and expertise to promote system change at 3 levels of government, services to assist survivors with rebuilding their lives, public awareness, education to children. And we would promote chastity until marriage. Working with the Justice Department to purge criminal records of women and girls charged with prostitution offenses or non-violent crimes as a result of their victimization while being trafficked. And of course, stiffer sentencing for the people that are trafficking them. Work with municipalities and provinces to increase housing and services for the victims. Provide funding to rebuild their lives. Teach teens how to create safe, healthy relationships. And create a culture again of encouraging sex within marriage. Thank you.
Thank you. The same question to candidate number 2.
Thank you very much for the question. May I just say it's appalling that we're still having these conversations in 2019. We know that the majority of human trafficking victims are women and Indigenous peoples, and the fact that it's still happening today represents a failure to prevent and a failure to put a final end to such shameful practices. The NDP is committed to rooting out those responsible for such horrific crimes and ensuring that Canada does not become a safe haven for human trafficking. We are committed to working closely with community groups that advocate for the victims of human trafficking and those who seek to educate those in the community about human trafficking, how to identify the signs and how to approach a situation if they believe human trafficking is involved.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, again, the same question.
Thank you very much. Human trafficking is becoming increasingly dangerous for all Canadians. 95% are women. Numbers have increased from 2009 to 2016, 0.94 per 100,000 population in 2016. That's 340 cases in that year. But the total for the 7 years is 1,220. Ontario has the highest accounts of human trafficking at 65.8%, a total of 723 cases. That's pretty appalling to realize that. So to fix this, how do we do it? Well, it's not something that can be fixed overnight. It's going to be something that's going to take a lot of time and effort. So let's start with increasing our border security. Fix the illegal border crossings and have the whole border considered a legal point of entry. Increase the funds for CSIS, RCMP, and Canadian Immigration and Citizenship. When doing interviews with new Canadians, do a face-to-face interview to ensure those coming to Canada are aligned with Canadian values. It's not a quick fix, but it's a start. This isn't anything that's on our platform, but there are incidents within our platform that I've taken my information from, and is something that we need to look seriously at in our criminal code. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4, again, the same question, please.
Thank you. This is an issue that the Justice Committee, of which I'm a member in Ottawa, has sat on for the last year. The issue is very difficult. Although you will have statistics, we know they're totally inaccurate. They're only the charges that were laid that show up in those statistics. So what we do know is that human trafficking takes across the whole generational spectrum of Canada. There are many people trafficked for the purpose of domestic use, for working in restaurants, working in fields, and in the sex trade. So what we looked at and realized that we need to put more emphasis on the enforcement and to get the courts to understand how important it is for sentencing. It's not an issue that is going to be easily fixed by putting money into housing and other issues. But what we do find and what we do know is a great deal of information was gleaned by Joy Smith from our party previously. She's done reports on it. And if anybody's interested, I would highly recommend you look at Joy's documents on it, her reports, and attend any of the sessions that she has put on across the country.
Thank you. Question number 2, and we will start with candidate number 2, Matthew Chambers, to answer. What will you do to stand up for strong environmental protections and Canadian leadership on climate change?
Thank you for the question. The NDP recognizes a couple of things. One, we recognize that yes, climate change is real. Yes, human beings have an impact on the environment. Yes, climate change is a serious threat to the future of this planet. On Friday, people across the country took to the streets to demand action, and I was pleased to join the group that marched here in Woodstock. We know that this is no time for half measures and more empty promises as we see coming from the Liberals and Conservatives. The NDP has a bold plan to tackle climate change that includes ending subsidies for fossil fuel industries, or corporations, making all public transit in Canada by 2030 electric, transitioning to a new clean energy economy that will create 300,000 new long-lasting and good-paying jobs. Together, we can protect the land, air, and water and become climate leaders of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, the same question.
Thank you for the question. It is an undisputed fact that the world's climate has always changed and will continue to change. Until 12,000 years ago, much of Canada was under ice, and it's thanks to natural climate change that we can live here today. Canada should be a leader in developing ways to improve our environment. We have done such a great job so far. In Ontario, the reduction since 2007 is 22%. One of the most powerful effects of carbon dioxide is not on temperature. It's not on temperature. Because if you talk about greenhouse gases, it's water vapor. That's more important than CO2. The only proof we have so far that CO2 is greening the planet, 20 to 50% of the Earth's vegetation area has been greening. Only 4% has been showing a little browning. That tells you that the overwhelming effects of this increase in CO2 is fertilization in the atmosphere. Canada has 318 billion trees, which cleans our air. If you think we need more, plant a tree. Now, Trudeau just announced we need 2 billion trees planted over the next 10 years. Well, he's had 4 years to start planting trees to make us carbon neutral. So what is he telling you about your carbon tax? That's a big question there. So if all the parties want to clean the air, just plant more trees. No need for a carbon tax and the hysteria. Our plan is simple. Prioritize Canada at implementing practical solutions to make Canada's air, water, and soil cleaner, including bringing the clean drinking water to our Indigenous people. Lead by example so we can share our successes with the world. Keep our tax dollars here at home to develop technologies by great Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you. As a moderator, I'm going to ask the audience to keep all the cackling to a dull roar. I do not want to hear it. I want to show some professionalism to these candidates that are actually taking a stand to run for a position, please. Candidate number 4.
Thank you. Climate change and the whole issue surrounding that is very important to us as a nation, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we're less than 2% of the CO2 emissions in the world. So if you could cut everything down in Canada, we'll all be out of work. I'm not sure where young people are going to find their food or whatever, but if you cover Canada in concrete, we still will have CO2 emissions. Much of it comes from natural sources. Saying that, it is still incumbent upon us to work to minimize what we can. We recognize that if we shut ours all off, if we get ours totally eliminated, China is going to pump out more in a day than we pump out in a year. What we need to do is more about those things that are directly affecting us that we don't see. We need to stop our cities from pumping raw sewage into the lakes and rivers and streams. The City of Montreal pumps raw sewage into the St. Lawrence. In the West Coast, they've been pumping raw sewage into the ocean for a long time. We need to fix those things. Those are Canadian. We need to fix them. We need to work on the environment in all aspects of it.
Thank you.
Hold on, I gotta move the mic. Move that mic back down there. Thank you so much.
Candidate number 1, the same question, please.
Thank you. CHP recognizes our responsibility to steward and care for the natural environment. CHP will protect Canada's air, soil, and water from destructive contamination of man-made chemicals. CO2 is a natural beneficial gas, not a pollutant. CO2 as the cause of climate change is an unproven theory. CHP opposes all carbon taxes, cap and trade carbon credits. CHP will oppose any attempt to block sunlight. Global dimming has been proposed by some geoengineering advocates in an effort to cool the planet. And CHP also cares about the moral environment. Instead of frantically pushing efforts to reduce production of CO2, those concerned about the environment should focus on research into natural alternatives to toxic chemicals in agriculture, industry, and medicine. Proper treatment of raw sewage, serious efforts to reduce plastic pollution on land and sea, and reduction of airborne particles are worthy of efforts and should be improved. We also recognize that there are underlying spiritual principles, when violated, may result in damage to the environment, the economy, and human health. We declare that mankind's disobedience to God and His commandments may result in disastrous consequences for us and our children. While eco-activists wonder what kind of planet we will leave our children, we wonder what kind of children and how many will we leave on this planet.
Thank you.
Can we move the mic to candidate 3, please?
Question 3, and we'll start with candidate 3, candidate Wendy Martin. What are the most important challenges facing our country, and how do you propose to address them?
Thank you very much. The party will do all it can to protect all Canadians so no one is left behind. What I find is to be one of our most important issues right now in Canada is our rights and freedoms are being slowly removed right before us. The rights of Canadians to freely hold and express beliefs are being eroded at an alarming speed under the Trudeau government. Some of its recent decisions even required the Canadians to renounce their most deeply held moral convictions and express opinions they disagree with. In 2018, the Liberal government denied summer job funding to organizations, including charities, that would not sign an attestation to supporting abortion. History and social scientific research show that freedom in conscience and freedom of expression, when maximally protected, advance the intellectual life of a nation, foster greater ideology, diversity, and societal understanding and nurture other freedoms necessary for a successful democracy. What some people find politically incorrect, offensive, or even hateful cannot serve as a legal bias for discrimination and censorship. Canadians should be able to enjoy maximum freedom of conscience and expression as guaranteed in Section 2 of our Charter. Our plan will restrict the definition of hate speech in the criminal code to expression which explicitly advocates the use of force against identifiable groups or persons based on protected criteria such as religion, race, sex, or sexual orientation. We will repeal C-16 and M-103, ensure that Canadians can exercise their freedom of conscience to its fullest extent as it is intended under the Charter and are not discriminated against because of their moral convictions. We will withhold federal funding from any post-secondary institution shown to be violating the freedom of expression of its students or faculty. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4, the same question, please.
I'm convinced that the major challenges facing Canada is our opportunity to provide product around the world to exports. Our current government has offended most nations. We're now in trouble in trying to get trading agreements with them. Currently, our Canadian debt is $768 billion, with interest over $26 billion every year, which is more than the budget for our military. And if you knew where we were and we looked at it, we recognize now that we're $19,000 per person in debt in this country. If we can't get a hold of our debt and get our industries functioning properly, we got too many regulations. We've committed to reducing regulations, and every regulation we bring in, we will take out 2 others. It's those kinds of things that hold Canada back on the world stage.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, the same question, please.
Thank you. Well, I did find this question actually very challenging. It had me thinking a lot. My first thought is that the greatest error and challenge that Canada has made since the onset of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the failure to have governance that adheres to the preamble, where Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. The greatest challenge and the greatest need is to put in place Canadian governance that honors the preamble in word and in deed. And until this happens, mankind will continue to bring harm to itself and the nation via the results of willful disobedience in every area of life. We see this rampant willful disregard for God and his ways in some of the following: legalizing biological males to use public intimate female facilities such as washrooms, change rooms, and showers; redefining marriage to be anything other than the union of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others; promoting and celebrating high-risk sexual behavior, lowering the age of consent for high-risk sexual behavior, killing innocent children within their mother's womb, over 4 million in 50 years. Thousands are killed, or 100,000 in 1 year. Permitting ISIS fighters and supporters to live freely in Canada, silencing public scrutiny of public policy, and of course the 650 million in debt and 70 million daily in interest. Integrity as well is something that we're lacking in this country, and I feel that a lot of us are wondering who is telling the truth. So that is a great challenge as well. The media is biased, and we want to see integrity in our government leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2.
Thank you very much for the question. Some of the things that I think are the biggest issues facing our society today: affordability, healthcare, and climate change. And I'm glad to say that my party's platform addresses all of these. When we talk about affordable housing, we're not just talking about the major population centers, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. We pay some of the highest housing prices right here in southwestern Ontario. The NDP has a plan to build 500,000 new affordable housing units right across the country. These are just the main points of the plan. If you want more, you can come over and talk to me afterwards. Pharmacare. People in this country are having to make impossible choices. I spoke to a lady here in Woodstock the other day, and she told me she's on medication for type 2 diabetes, MS, and she has a compressed disc in her spine. She has had to choose between paying for new test strips or eating. That is unacceptable in this day and age. That's why we will bring in universal pharmacare, and we know that, excuse me, we know that we stand on the edge of a climate disaster. We know that climate change affects all facets of life, and we are going, sorry. And we must do better in this, and we can do better. We have to demand better of our leaders, and I think the NDP is the governing party to bring that in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Question number 4, and we'll start with candidate number 4, Dave Mckenzie.
Well, thank you very much, and I think
Oh,
that...
you don't? I have to read the question first, Dave.
Oh, that's all right.
What will you, what will you or should our nation do over the long term to ensure health care access for all?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, number one is I think we have a pretty good healthcare system as it is. We know that there are problems within the healthcare system, that it doesn't cover everything. I think that what we're seeing in Ontario is a long term, and that's what directly affects us here in this room, what happens in Ontario. The previous Liberal governments built up so much of administration, so many costs in the system that it didn't fulfill the needs for the medical people. Now, when you talk to the medical folks today, they have the ability to do more, want to do more, and can do more, but they're held back by funding cuts. Now, Andrew Scheer has already committed to putting $1.5 billion into new testing equipment going forward. I think that will help us in the long term with more health care and a variety of health care, and I'm convinced that the way to go is to make the healthcare system function as it should with the money that's available and whatever additional money will get put in over the next few years.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, the same question, please.
Thank you. Introduction of Pharmacare has some considerations that we would want addressed before a plan was considered. The government is challenged to decide what drugs it would cover. A CHP government would not cover drugs for the purpose of ending life, either through abortion or medically assisted suicide. Drugs for life-saving purpose only would be covered. Puberty-blocking drugs and elective hormone treatments would not be covered. A pharmaceutical plan would be unable to cover all options that people want, and some Canadians may be forced to take medications they don't want if they want it covered by a plan. For instance, some people prefer natural health products. Would natural health products be covered? Which ones? What would be the criteria? What drugs would be covered for illnesses with many manifestations such as cancer? All drugs or some? These need to be considered before a plan is introduced. This requires time spent with natural health care professionals, medical professionals, pharmaceutical companies, along with the provincial health departments and Health Canada. As we've seen with doctor hospital visits, the value diminishes in the mind of the consumer if there is no price to pay. There must be a plan in place to ensure that ignorance of the cost of medication can cause the cost to be considered or taken for granted. Our personal income security account would help to stabilize this concern. So at this point, considerable work needs to be put into this. An anticipated timeline would be during the 4-year mandate of this government. Oh, I have 30 seconds more. However, some drugs could be approved in advance to reduce the suffering of Canadians who are ill and unable to afford medication. And finally, this could be implemented alongside of our personal income security account. This would both protect the value of medications and ensure that Canadians have more choice in their treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2, the same question, please.
Thank you again for the question. This goes back to priorities. As I said in my last answer, people are having to make unthinkable and impossible choices, like whether or not they're going to be able to afford their medication or eat or pay rent or go to school. And that's unacceptable that in 2019 in Canada, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, that people are making these choices. We are the only country in the world that has socialized medicine that does not cover prescription medication. That is why we will bring in universal pharmacare system, and we're not going to stop there. We are going to expand Medicare to cover Not only Pharmacare, but dental care, vision care, hearing care, and for the first time, mental health care, making our healthcare system in Canada truly head-to-toe coverage. We can do better, and we should do better. And yes, the previous Liberal government did backlog and pay freezes, but what also is not helping is deep budget cuts. That's not the answer to austerity, more austerity. It's just not the answer to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, again, the same question, please.
Thank you. Our party does not promise massive public spending on National Pharmacare program. Instead, we do recognize that healthcare is an exclusive provincial responsibility. Even global news recognize this fact. In their news report a few weeks ago, the media questioned, don't they understand the lines between federal and provincial governments? Why is this a problem for our party leaders to understand? Are we being misled? For years, the federal government has insisted that provinces satisfy a series of conditions set out in the Canada Health Act in exchange for transfer payments. These conditions discourage innovation. Also, the money does not directly fund healthcare services. It is simply added to the province's budgets, and they decide where and how they spend it. This leads to confusing and bickering between provinces and the federal government. This prevents implementation of sound reforms. The transfer payments have doubled since 2006 from 20 billion to 40 billion and nothing to show for it. Our plan respects the Constitution and will hold the provinces accountable to their citizens. The budget for healthcare transfer is 40 billion. We'll replace this payment transfer with a permanent transfer of tax points to the provinces and territories for a stable source of revenue. Ottawa will give up the GST and give this back to the provinces and territories. The GST is expected to be $40 billion this fiscal year's budget. Poorer provinces will have a temporary program to compensate them for lower revenues than the transfers they once received. We will increase conditions for innovations, or we will create conditions for innovations, and the provinces and territories will be fully responsible for healthcare funding and management and fully accountable to their citizens. Something to remember, today's debt is tomorrow's taxes. We don't need more debt in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 5, starting with candidate number 1, Melody Oldred. How will you work to increase job opportunities for your constituents, and do you agree with having a minimum content rule for industry and purchasing in Canada to protect manufacturing jobs?
The CHP government for sure would be into infrastructure. We need our highways always maintained. Also, there would be state-of-the-art equipment that always needs to be updated, especially with our medical care. So those are 2 areas where there would be lots of jobs. And as well with the greener economy, I'm sure that would produce jobs as well. With today's minimum wage standards and working conditions, there are fewer legitimate reasons for job action. While unions still have an important role in protecting their members from unsafe conditions and helping them maintain reasonable job security with seniority, equal pay for equal work, much of today's job actions, especially in the public sector, are the result of an unrealistic expectation. Public sector employees should have pensions and benefits equal to those of private sector employees doing the same sort of work. Public sector employees performing essential services, security, healthcare, education, mail delivery, public transportation should not use public inconvenience during a strike as a bargaining tool. Reasonable mutual agreement between employees and employers should become the new standard, and strikes and lockouts a thing of the past. CHP also believes in equal work for equal pay, and as well, work as a means by which citizens may pursue their vocation as an avenue of service fulfillment and economic well-being. Guidelines for fairness would include equal opportunities for all people and qualified to do a job irrespective of race, color, creed, or gender, and also reasonable allowance for one's religious beliefs should they rise to conflict in the work schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2, the same question, please.
Thank you for the question. From steel mills and auto plants to farms and high-tech companies and everything in between, Canadian industries power our economy and they sustain the jobs that families across the country rely on. But for too long now, liberals and conservative governments have ignored the need to support Canadian industries, trading away the advantages in trade deals and failing to invest in the targets and failing to invest in the targeted support that our industries need to thrive. As a start, New Democrats will strengthen and modernize the Investment Canada Act to protect Canadian jobs. New Democrats will also require that in all infrastructure projects that Canadian-made steel and aluminum is mandatory across the country. And there is, of course, more. If you'd like to see it from my platform, you can come up and talk to me afterwards. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 3. Again, the same question, please.
Thank you very much. I want to make it very clear that government can't create jobs unless they're government jobs, and you want bigger government. We can facilitate things that can bring jobs to Canada. One would be, let's sell the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's $4.5 billion that Trudeau wasted. And this will create tens of thousands of jobs, which will have the ripple effect to create more jobs in different areas, which could end up creating hundreds of thousands of jobs across Canada. Remove interprovincial trade barriers. Canada is losing up to $130 billion in revenue. This will create jobs. Businesses find it easier to import from outside of Canada than to deal with the bureaucracy and interprovincial trades within Canada. By reducing the corporate tax rate from 15 to 10%, you are given an incentive for companies, big and small, to look at Canada as a great place to set up business. Limit the number of temporary foreign workers and make sure that they fulfill temporary positions and do not compete unfairly with Canadian workers. I believe we should be using as much as we can of Canadian products as possible. This is prevented right now with interprovincial trade. So once we use our Constitution, Section 91(2), this will help and improve more free trade within Canada. This will bring prosperity back to our country. As you can see, Trudeau does not support Canada or Canadian workers by allowing China to do a build of 2 energy plants. This is costing Canadians billions of dollars and thousands of jobs lost, and that's not using our steel, it's using China steel. And it is a proven fact that if you want to raise wages for the working poor, you must lower your immigration. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4. Again, the same question, please.
Thank you very much. And one of the issues we have right now is not the opportunities for jobs, but it's the opportunity to fill jobs. If you go around this county, you will see a number of job wanted signs posted outside of businesses. One of our problems is we do not train our people necessarily for the jobs that are available. We have a failure within our education system, but we also need to increase our immigration of skilled trades and skilled individuals to come in here to keep these factories operating and other business, not only factories, but our high-tech jobs are going unfilled because we don't have the people to do it. So what we need to do is work on our educational system, improve that, get our tax rates low, and get our debt down so that we don't have such a high tax for our industry and for our individuals. We've got jobs, we need people now, and we need people, the right people for the jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Moving on with question 6, we're starting with candidate number 2 to answer. What, if any, specific steps will you take to address inequalities facing minorities in Canada?
I think for too long, we as Canadians have been able to watch the news and see what goes on in the U.S., for example. We see, acts of racial anger and that sort of thing. And to say, and then we can say to ourselves, oh, well, that doesn't happen here. Surely not. Well, the sad truth is it absolutely does happen here. In 2017, hate crimes hit an all-time high in Canada with over 2,000 reported cases. We are committed to confronting discrimination, racism in all forms where it may be found. and the confronting the discrimination and racism that Indigenous and racialized peoples and communities face daily across this country. And I think with Jagmeet Singh as the leader of the New Democratic Party, he is the perfect leader to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, again, the same question, please.
Thank you very much. We have laws in Canada that protect all minority groups under our rights and freedoms. I am for fair employment for all Canadians. If you have the skills and the qualifications for a job, you should have the opportunity to have that job. It shouldn't be going to somebody that just to meet a quota. So we need to make sure that we're filling these jobs for everybody with the proper skills. Our distinct values are those of contemporary Western civilization. They include democracy, individual rights and freedoms, including freedom of religious belief and freedom to criticize religion, equally between men and women, the equal treatment of all citizens regardless of ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation. Protecting all of our rights and freedoms will help any disadvantaged group. So when we're looking at can we address inequalities, we have that already in our Constitution. So we should be making sure that our employers are following that, and we have the safety for our workers. So if you don't have the proper qualities and the proper skills and you're doing a job that has safety issues, we have to make sure that they're trained properly. So I'm not saying you don't hire somebody that doesn't have the proper skills, because there's a lot of jobs out there that you can do on the job training, but we have to make sure that our occupational health and safety systems are in place so that we make sure all of our citizens are protected when they're in the workforce, and we can encourage growth. And we start from the bottom and we work our way up. Nobody gets a job as a CFO right off the bat. You kind of have to work as an accountant and work your way up. So that's what I mean by qualities and skills. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4, again, the same question, please.
Right. It seems to me that the question presumes that there are inequalities facing minorities in Canada. I'm not sure there are. There may be discrimination issues with them, but equally I would say it's within those communities themselves. This week I had a Sikh come to me and complain that he's being discriminated against because of his own people. He comes from a lower caste in India, and the rest of the folks won't deal with him. Well, you talk about that being a discrimination, but it doesn't eliminate him from having a job or a good job. He does. But we need to work on what the Americans have done, is assimilating people into their society. I'm not sure that'll ever happen here, nor should we ask it to, but we sometimes lose sight of what the inequalities are. And when we talk about hate crimes against minorities, in fact, the largest number of hate crimes was against the Jews. And the Jews, as you know, have been in this country a long, long time. We wouldn't tend to think of them as minorities, and we tend to think of the mosques being attacked and so on, but it's actually the Jewish synagogues are the biggest source of discrimination and harassment. So we just need to work far harder as a society to welcome people into our communities and into our job places.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, again, the same question, please.
Well, first of all, I would think when it comes to minority groups, we can all agree that our Indigenous people do need ongoing help to bring them more into society, to educate them, have them encouraged to get jobs, and that would help them tremendously. I did hear about, here in Oxford County, I think there's a new organization called Circles, and it's meant to help the poorer people in the community. It sounds like a wonderful organization, and I thought that would be something that I'm sure we could use a blueprint like that for our Indigenous people to help them overcome their poverty and to feel less alienated, and again to integrate into society. I also thought too of Christians. I think that in some ways we're becoming targeted and somewhat of a minority group with our freedoms being taken. I know even in this election, I've had at least one really angry call. I've been called a hateful bigot, and our party as well. And so we're misinterpreted, and there seems to be unnecessary anger against us. I know with CCBR, that's a group that shows the graphic images of children, and they do it very peacefully, and they've been attacked many times. I think there's about 73 different attacks that they've had in various forms. So that was just my thoughts on it. And our laws must always be there to honor biblical principles and minorities. Pushing for changes should not be given special status if it means violating time-tested, God-honoring principles. Thank you.
Thank you.
This one's mine.
Okay, question 7, starting with candidate number 3. How will the working class benefit from your party being elected?
Thank you very much. The working class will benefit from lower tax brackets. The first $15,000, zero tax. This will save them $529 per person. We will eliminate the carbon tax, more money in your pockets. We will phase out supply management, as right now this is an outdated system and it's had its time in the 70s, but we are now in 2019. Supply management creates increases in all different markets, like restaurants. So as they have to pay more for their supplies, makes them less competitive. Supply management costs the poorest 20% of Canadians on average $339 more to buy these products. That's like a 2.3% tax on their income. More competition is always better, and it is only fair that all farmers have the same level of playing field. Supply management causes other farmers to lose their exporting ability, and this affects their income levels. Removing interprovincial trade barriers, there is too many barriers when our Constitution states that there are to be no interprovincial trade barriers. This will make it easier for many people to work across Canada, because you could be a nurse here, but you might not be qualified to be a nurse in BC. PPC will ensure that the temporary foreign workers are only taking temporary jobs and not taking the jobs from Canadians. PPC will also kick out the CRTC out of the telecom industry to allow for more competitions, which will then allow for your telecom communication bills to go down. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4, the same question, please.
Okay, well, first scrap the Trudeau carbon tax, which will lower the cost of everyday essentials like gas, groceries, and home heating. Introduce a universal tax cut, saving an average couple of $850 a year. Take the GST off home heating costs, saving your family $107. Make maternity benefits tax-free, putting up $4,000 back in the pockets of new parents. And introducing the children's fitness tax credit and children's arts and learning credits. I think we need to look at how we can directly affect tax benefits without crippling the economy. And I think these are the things that we need to do. We need to get the carbon tax off of everything. It costs money on groceries, heating oils we've talked about, but everything we buy has a carbon tax on it. So we need to get rid of that, and I think that'll go a long ways to helping the working class. And right now, they're struggling very, very hard to keep heads above water. There's an article today you may want to look at in the Financial Post that indicates that people are not able to save. They're only got enough money ahead from paycheck to paycheck. A lot of that is because of the tax we're paying and the lack of benefits from it.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, again, the same question, please.
Thank you. Yes, I agree there with Dave. It saddens my heart to see people working so hard with little pay, and they can even get ahead. It's even hard for some people that I know just to pay their bills. So the Fairtax is something that CHP would implement, and that's where you don't pay personal income taxes, but you would pay taxes on the goods and trade. So that would help people if they spend or if they buy less, they can better control saving their money and not have this terrible tax burden. The debt being paid off like a mortgage, so that somewhere down the road this debt gets paid off and dealt with, and it's not costing families just so much money when we have that to deal with. There would be workplace equality for sure, that all people, all genders, as long as they can work well, that they fit the job, then there's workplace equality. And the personal income security account is where we would still have the CPP, but the employers and the workers would put in a certain amount of money each month into this personal income security account. It's worked very well in Chile, where there are people that are retiring have substantial money put aside through this PISA. And of course, infrastructure, it's ongoing. That does provide jobs, and it's something that's always needed. So equal opportunities for all people who are able and qualified to do a job, irrespective of race, color, creed, or gender.
Thank you. Candidate number 2.
Our plan is specifically aimed at helping working people get ahead in this country. For too long, successive liberal and conservative governments have claimed to be on the side of working people, but have failed to deliver. Instead, they pander to big corporations, lobbyists, and their wealthy campaign contributors. Working people deserve a government that's on their side, that puts the needs of the many over the needs of the few, and I believe that an NDP government will deliver the results for working people because, of course, our party is made by and made up by working people.
Thank you. Question 8, we're going to start with candidate number 4. How will you protect retirees and the CCP going forward?
I believe that the first thing we need to do is get our tax system in better position. People can't retire now on a reasonable income. They're not able to save money. We're taking all the money out of their pockets. They don't get a chance to save anything. Our CPP is well funded. It's invested around the world, and it will be there. I think we've seen stuff from a number of firms that indicate it's very solid. That money is there. What we need to worry about is our old age security. Whether or not the government will be able to fund that, that is a non-funded liability for the government, and we had proposed moving the old age limit there up to 68 over a period of time. Trudeau's brought it back to 65, but that's the one area that's going to be difficult going forward for the government to sustain is the old age pension. The CPP will be there because it is funded, it is workers' money and government money, and like I say, it's invested around the world.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, the same question, please.
The Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Pension are helpful income supplements, but are often entirely inadequate to meet the needs of the aging seniors who have contributed so greatly to our national economic growth and development. And again, the CHP would initiate this personal income security account for every Canadian at the time they enter the workforce. Rather than pooling the employment deductions of workers, the PISA would be a self-managed fund made up of workplace deductions for both the employee and the employer, vested in the personal savings account of each employee. It would be available when needed up to a certain annual threshold to compensate workers for time lost or periods of unemployment or disability. But its primary purpose would be to provide an adequate income for workers in retirement. And again, in Chile, where this has been implemented, workers have retired with substantial savings. The program would be phased in over time and would be optional for those who understand and wish to take advantage of its benefits. Those who choose not to opt into the PISA would continue to contribute to CPP and receive pensions under existing rules. And again, having the debt paid off would be a huge advantage to money saving in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2.
Well, Canadians deserve to be able to retire with dignity. One of the most blatant examples of corporate pension theft is, of course, when Sears Canada went under, and those employees who had worked there for 30, 40 years were left hung out to dry, and the CEOs gave themselves a nice, juicy severance package. We will guard against pension theft and make sure that companies protect their workers' pensions and strengthen public pensions. As for old age pensions, we are committed to saving the average Canadian money through our Pharmacare plan will save the average Canadian $500 a month. Our green energy plan will be saving Canadians thousands on their power bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, again, the same question, please.
Thank you very much. First off, I'd like to just mention that Justin Trudeau gave $2 billion of our Canada pension surplus money to Mumbai. This is not government money to spend, in my opinion. This money is you and your employer. You have put that in, and the government manages it for you. And I don't think they're doing a very good job at it, in my personal opinion. The PPC has no policy on this as of yet. But personally, I would like to look at things in a different way to improve the benefits of CPP. This is an employee and employer paid pension. This is not a benefit, as the Liberals like to call it. The government should not be allowed to use any surplus of this money in this pension. It should be used to increase the payments. I would like to see a rehaul. I believe that those who pay into the pension should have an option if they would like the government to control their money or pay them, or for them to control their money. There's different options out there, and I think we need to have a conversation and a discussion about that and how we can improve it. There's different types of pensions that are out in the market, and I appreciate Matthew and his party looking into that, but we're also looking at bankruptcy laws, legislation when it comes to defined pensions and defined contribution pensions. And another thing I like to look at with our CPP is disability pension. So if you take your CPP disability pension, okay, that's deducted off your CPP when you turn 65. But also, if you're on long-term disability, the long-term disability deducts your CPP. I think that is unfair, and we need to change that legislation so that we can make sure that our people that are disabled and go into retirement with their disability, they do not lose their pension, and they have an option to take CPP disability instead of being forced by long-term disability. It's your pension, it's your control. Thank you.
Thank you.
Starting at, can you move the mic down to number 1, please?
Okay, question number 9, starting with candidate number 1, Melody Aldred. What would your government do to alleviate the affordable housing crisis?
Thank you. Well, first off, there's 3 points here. We would reduce foreign purchases of homes, businesses, and farmland. Strengthen the family, so that way the prices don't go up. We want to encourage Canadians to buy the land here, not foreign purchases. Strengthen the family unit, reduce divorce and the necessity of one couple maintaining 2 homes, and also make stay-at-home parenting more affordable. So owning one's own home is perhaps one of the highest priorities of most Canadians. In some Canadians, Canada's largest cities, this goal has become almost impossible due to soaring prices and other costs of living. Even renting or leasing a home within cities like Vancouver and Toronto has become so expensive that many young couples feel they cannot afford children or feel compelled to use childcare services to allow both parents to work outside the home. Aside from the stresses created by having to manage 2 work schedules, there are additional transportation costs and, most importantly, a reduction in the amount of quality time and increased influence of other non-family members on child development. The high cost of housing has also discouraged many low-income citizens from even the dream of home ownership. In combination with unemployment or underemployment, drug use, mental illness, broken, dysfunctional families, high housing costs have contributed to the number of people choosing to live on the streets rather than face the challenges of finding a safe, secure place to live. It should be noted, however, that homelessness is not the same as houselessness. In many cities, there are unused or underused existing buildings. Some of the people now living on the street could be living under an existing roof if their families had managed to stay together. Some young people have burned bridges with their parents. Some husbands or wives of a broken home have become so discouraged with court costs, alimony payments, and poor job prospects, they have simply given up. Law enforcement's healthcare.
Thank you. Moving on, please. Candidate number 2, the same question, please.
The NDP recognizes that we are in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. I use the example of Ingersoll, where there are plenty of new houses going up, but I would not qualify a single one of them as being affordable. The NDP is is committed to building 500,000 new affordable housing units across the country. To make life easier for first-time buyers, we will re-implement 30-year mortgages. This will allow for This will allow for smaller monthly payments and free up funds to make ends meet for new families. We also plan on lending a helping hand in closing costs by upping the home buyer's tax to $1,500. And there's more. Excuse me.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, the same question, please.
Thank you very much. Again, housing is under the jurisdiction of provincial government. Sustainable immigration is an important part of housing issues we are facing today. 41% of immigrants choose to live in Toronto or Vancouver. This creates a supply and demand and will increase the price of housing. It is a proven fact that mass immigration creates pricing of houses to increase. PPC will remove the capital gains tax, so in theory, this may help stabilize the price of housing as landlords will have more income and hopefully they won't, increase your price. Now, I want to take an opportunity here to talk about some housing development that was given in the Milton area. It's not Oxford, but it was done, and it was done by the Liberal government for affordable housing. But it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for the photo ops to be done at that event. Couldn't that money be used elsewhere instead of in media and photo ops? So this is where I think we have to have more control over our government and what they're doing with our money. So we have a huge debt. We need to balance that debt. So if we can balance our debt in 2 years like the PPC wants, then we can do a lot more to help every single Canadian. But we cannot control the price of housing because it's supply and demand. And there's nothing we can do. If you want to sell your house for $500,000 and somebody comes in and offers you $600,000, what are you going to do? You're probably going to take the $600,000, and that increases the value of the houses around you. So just take a look and see what we can do in that area. You're not going to be able to afford to sell your house and upgrade if it keeps going this way with mass immigration. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4, again, the same question, please.
Thank you, and I think most of us would agree that government should not be considering building affordable housing. That's not their job. It's up to private industry to do that. We need to make the way clear for them to do it. One of the things that we would do is to, through CMHC, increase the 30-year amortization terms, change the stress test for first-time home buyers, and at the same time make available lands that are surplus to the federal government so that homes can be built on a reasonable cost for the purchase of the land.
Thank you. Question number 10, we'll start with candidate number 2, Matthew Chambers, please. In review of Canada's problem with its current electoral system, are you in favor of electoral reform, and if so, in what way?
Ooh, this is one of my favorites. In 2015, Justin Trudeau said upwards of 1,800 times that 2015 would be the last election held under first past the post. But as soon as he was swept into power with only 39.5% of the vote, I might add, he suddenly thought electoral reform, it's not such a good idea anymore, promptly abandoning electoral reform and saying that it was his right as Prime Minister to drop the plan. That always gets me angry when I have to read that again, that he dropped it again. It always gets me going.
Me too.
A new Democratic government will bring in mixed member proportional representation and establish an independent citizens' assembly to recommend the best way to put into place for the next election, and build a referendum to confirm the system once it has been in place for 2 elections. So we run under MMP for the next 2 elections, and then we hold a referendum, and people can have their right to decide whether they want to keep the new proportional system or go back to first past the post. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 3, the same question, please.
Thank you very much. We don't have a platform on this, but this is what our leader has stated. Our electoral system is not perfect, but it's also not the worst. And at this time, our party will not be looking at electoral reform. There are more important issues at hand that must be addressed first. Balancing the budget is the top priority of our party. We will do this in 2 years. Today's debt is the taxes of tomorrow, and no other party is taking this seriously. Trudeau, the budget will balance itself. I almost fell off my seat when I heard that. And no other party up here today will balance the budget in less than 5 years. So that means they have to be elected again to balance the budget. So we cannot manage this. We have to take action now. The PPC is the only party that will take a stand on this issue, and we will tell you the truth. We will balance it in 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 4. Again, the same question, please.
Well, I think the Westminster system, which we currently have, is, like Maxime has said, it may not be the best, but I think it's the best with what we've got. The province of British Columbia have looked at proportional representation and have had referendums. I believe it's been turned down twice. It's not a simple fix to go to proportional from the first past the post. Our system is what they've used in England for hundreds of years. We've used it here for 100 and some odd number of years. I think it isn't broken, and I don't know that we can fix it with simple fixes.
Thank you.
Can you hand the mic down to them? Can you hand the mic down to them?
Thank you so much. Candidate number 1, again, the same question, please.
Thank you. Canada's current electoral finance regulations financially reward parties with elected MPs by transferring substantial amounts of taxpayer dollars in the form of reimbursements for electoral expense. Following the 2015 campaign, the Conservative Party and its candidates received approximately $31 million from Canadian taxpayers. The Liberals received a similar amount, with slightly smaller proportions going to the NDP, the Greens, and the Bloc. The Christian Heritage Party and other smaller parties received $0. This blatant transfer of funds from taxpayers to the largest and most well-funded parties allows them to run financial campaigns, while smaller parties are at a severe disadvantage in their ability to inform the electorate of their policies and to promote their candidates. This results in votes being cast by an underinformed electorate. CHP Canada would act to correct these inequalities currently evident in our electoral law. The CHP has long favored some form of proportional representation whereby every party would achieve a percentage of seats in Parliament roughly equal to the percentage of votes received. There are a number of variations of PR, each of them attempting to ensure our government represents the view of all Canadians. Another electoral model is a preferential ballot, ranked ballot, which would allow voters to rank the candidates or parties in order of preference. No system is perfect. The real challenge for Canadians is that our Western society as a whole has abandoned Christian principles that made it great: freedom of speech, respect for life, respect for the Creator, and for the rule of law. When voters ignore these principles, poor governments result. CHP Canada would hold a national referendum on the most effective method of electing our representatives. It would ensure ongoing and regular engagement with the Canadian electorate.
The last question before we open up the mic on the floor to the audience will be start with candidate number 3, please. What steps will your party take to move forward with reconciliation among Aboriginal people and all Canadians?
Well, thank you very much for that question today, because as you see, I brought some yellow ribbons and or some orange ribbons, and I see some orange shirts out there, so I'm not sure if you know why you're wearing orange. Today is Truth and Reconciliation Day for our Indigenous children, for the lives that were taken. So first, I just wanted to start with that, and I'd like to thank all of my candidates for taking the opportunity to wear the ribbons that I gave them today, because this is an important part of today. So when we take a look at this, I'm not going to get through all of my points on here, so please take a look at our platform or ask me after. The Aboriginal population of Canada is extremely diverse. It accounts for about 5% of Canada's population and comprises of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. There are more than 600 First Nations communities across Canada. More than half of these First Nations don't live on reserves. Aboriginal issues are very complex. Some communities are prosperous and others are poorer than the average Canadian. Many do not have basic services that we'll take for granted, such as clean water. There are other major issues regarding treaty negotiations, housing, property rights on the reserves, and more. It is not possible to address them all. in this platform. Respect. Many injustices were committed in the past by previous governments towards Aboriginals. We cannot rewrite the past. How we all love to do this. We will seek the best way to live together harmoniously in the future. PPC will explore the options to replace the Indian Act, which keeps Aboriginals in a state of dependency, and allow the federal governments to control more aspects of their lives with new framework that guarantees equal rights and responsibilities to all Aboriginal people in Canada. We'll respect our Constitution and our treaties. We will affirm the federal government's power to approve natural resources and infrastructure projects after consultations with effective groups and in partnership to ensure they can benefit from these economical opportunities. The freedom is lack of real property rights on reserves.
Thank you very much. Candidate number 4, again, the same question, please.
It is a very difficult question because, as you've already heard, how many different bands and tribes there are across the country. Many of them are also governed by 2 or 3 different bodies. So to make an agreement with one, you've got to make an agreement with 2 or 3 within that whole band, and it doesn't seem to happen. I think we need to keep working at it. Chuck Strahl, who was our member a number of years ago, spent a great deal of time, did iron out a number of agreements, land agreements, but the bigger problem is dealing with the issues within the nation themselves. We dealt with issues with financing. We heard from a lot of female chiefs that they wanted to have some sort of a system where the band had to be accountable for the money they got. And when Trudeau was made the Prime Minister, he heard from a lot of male chiefs that they didn't want that accountability, so it went. But those are the kinds of things that then create problems within the band. If they all knew where their money is, where it's going, and who's getting it, we'd find it a whole lot easier to deal with reconciliation with that community.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, again, the same question, please.
Thank you. Yes, it's complicated working with this problem. I would hope that we could give incentives to the various groups individually so that these people would want to come out from the covering that they're under and just integrate into society, to be educated and to have jobs and to find gratification that way so that they're able to move on more and not be so dependent on their separate communities that they have. And again, I did look at what you have going here in Oxford with this circles. I think it would be good on a community level to have people integrate with them, talk to them, share meals with them, and try to get to let them know that people care and to give them these incentives so individually people will see that there's a way out, they have a choice, and they don't need to stay in the state that they're in. I've heard too about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and again, that needs to be looked at and things rectified to see as well what's going on. I did hear a story from a friend of mine, and she knows an Indigenous lady, and she married a non-Indigenous man. She's graduated as a nurse. She paid her way to be nurse, and she's a good one. She enjoys her job. She's got children. She's working, and she's very happy. And meanwhile, her mother and siblings are on the reserve, and they're not working and very unhappy. So, integration. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2, again, the same question, please.
Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples has been deeply troubling and must change. Successive federal governments have denied the basic human rights of Indigenous peoples, stolen their children from their parents, forced Indigenous peoples off their lands and territories, and claimed lands without consent or without compensation, excuse me. We don't believe that Indigenous peoples should be treated this way. New Democrats are committed to undertaking the important work of reconciliation in good faith and in true and equal partnership with Indigenous communities across the country. We are committed to making different choices that prioritize Indigenous sovereignty, autonomy, and supporting services and programs that secure the quality of life and dignity for all Indigenous peoples in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is it for the scheduled questions. We will now open it up to the audience. I ask that everyone respect each other. I ask them to walk up to the mic, state if the question is for the entire panel or for an individual, and we will move forward. But again, I ask everyone to keep everything respectful and ask a legit question, please. Sir at the mic, please go ahead.
What I'm wondering is I've heard a lot of chit-chat on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom followed by drama. What is your party going to do to enforce this across Canada?
I assume the question's for the panel?
That's for everybody.
Okay, so we left off starting with number 3. I'm going to start with candidate number 4 to answer the question first, please. Again, we're still going to hold things to a time limit. Candidate number 4, can you please address the question?
Okay, I would just ask before you leave, is there something specific about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that you feel is not being followed or enforced?
The whole act. You guys were put in power to bring our laws up to date. So far, I've seen healthcare go, I've seen education go, I've seen dumps being created instead of the Green Act. Everything's going. We haven't got one thing left that's Canadian. 40% of our industrial, 40% of our commercial goes direct into U.S. pockets, plus a 25% tax. Why isn't this money used in Canada?
Okay.
I'm not sure that I can answer that, sir. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't deal with that kind of thing.
Under the Commercial Protection Act, it does.
Well, I can answer about our rights and freedoms as it is in the Constitution and Charter 2. There's a lot of things that's going on with our rights and freedoms right now. We are being censored by many people in different media platforms. Our freedom of speech or freedom of expression is being eliminated. I know you're talking about, I think you're talking about land and our rights to maybe property. Is that where you're going with that? I just want to clarify because I'm not quite sure and I do apologize. If I don't know the answer, I'm definitely going to look it up for you.
I'm going with the 40% that leaves Canada tax-free, plus a 25% tax on all the U.S. companies here in Canada, going direct to the States.
Okay, so what you're talking about then is income tax and the boutique tax credits that our conservatives and liberal governments put in for to get votes from these companies. And so they reduce their tax, and what happens is they don't pay Canadian tax. And they're basically tax-free. So you're talking about Amazon, Google, different companies like that. The People's Party of Canada will, 1, get rid of corporate welfare, and 2, get rid of all the boutique tax credits so that every company is paying the proper tax. That's why we're also reducing it from 15 to 10% tax. So we want to keep our tax dollars here so they're not going outside of our borders and are kept within our borders. Am I answering that on the right level there, sir?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move to candidate number 2, please.
Thank you very much for the question, and you're absolutely right. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada is the do-all, end-all. And through various trade negotiations that have been brought in by the successive Liberal and Conservative governments that we've had in Canada, seem to open up a lot of our exports that should be kept Canadian. Energy production, for example. When we use wind farms, quarter of that energy, or 40% of that energy has to go to the U.S. The way it should be is that we keep it all, and then whatever is generated afterwards, then we can sell it off to other people. But Canadian energy should stay in Canada first, and then all the excess that we create can then be sold to the other countries in the United States.
Thank you. We'll allow candidate number 1 to answer the question as well.
Thank you. Yes, government number 1 should be very transparent and call to account on a yearly basis as to how the money is being spent. So that there should be integrity there. That's what we expect of our leaders. That would be number one. And again, when it comes to resources and manufacturing in Canada, we do want to keep our resources within Canada, and then anything extra that we have would be traded outside of Canada, but we have to look after ourselves first and the resources that we have and make sure that Canada is looked after. So that's our stand, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to question number 2. Is this for all or individual?
This is for everyone.
Thank you.
It's about taxes. Over the past 30 years, most of the tax cuts have benefited the most wealthy Canadians the most. In the case of corporate tax cuts, that usually ends up going to the C-suite people, the CEOs and chairs at the board level. Under the previous reign of Stephen Harper, the GST was cut 2%, and by the Parliamentary Budget Office, they said that cost the federal government coffers $14 billion. How do you feel individually about re-implementing that 2%, which will affect the people who spend the most money the most? How would you feel about re-implementing that and fighting your own party to get that implemented?
Thank you for the question. Candidate number 1, we'll start with you. Please answer this question.
Thank you for that question. Of course, I'm not ready for it. I probably have to get back to you on it. I think I'd have to have some time to think about it. I just know from my own standpoint, we really are concerned about the taxes. They're far too high. And again, government transparency and paying off the debt, these things would play into the question that you've asked. And if I could get your email, I will give you a better answer on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2, the same question.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and you're absolutely right. In this country, we've had governments that have time and time again propped up their wealthy corporate friends above working people in this country. That's why the NDP has a plan that if you bring in $20 million or more a year, you can afford to pay a 1% wealth tax, and that's how we're going to pay for much of the things in our platform. And this has all been passed through the Parliamentary Budget Office. After just 1 year of our plan, we will have generated upwards of $4 billion in revenue. And that's interesting, especially when you consider what we could do with just $1 billion. With $1 billion, we could lift every single senior in this country out of poverty. With $1 billion, we could make sure that every veteran who has ever served this country does not go without the support and care that they have earned. With $1 billion, we could make sure that students do not leave school up to their eyes in debt and can afford a house. All this is possible. We just have to have the will to do it. And I believe New Democrats have the will to take on the super rich, the wealthy, and the corporate elites. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have a really good tax system for the People's Party of Canada. I don't agree with my friend here, Matthew, on taxing the wealthy, and people are going to boo at me at that because you know what? They've already paid their fair share of tax. And please just let me answer, okay? So they've paid their tax on that. And so are we doing a Robin Hood, steal from the rich, give to the poor? That's kind of my idea. So what I'm looking at here is you're talking about GST. I don't want to increase the GST because we don't need more tax to our Canadian citizens. We need to lower our tax. We need to make sure that we're using our money wisely within Canada. We're not giving our money outside of the Canadian border to foreign aid. We want to make sure that we invest in Canada, invest in Canadian people. So the first $15,000 will be your tax bracket of 0%, which is $529 savings. That's a lot of money to the poorest Canadians that are making minimum wage. We'll also take a look at between $15,000 and $100,000, you're only paying 15%, and then over $100,000, you're paying 25%. And there's no boutique tax credits. Our corporate tax goes from 15 to 10, and we're investing in Canada. This will create Canadian jobs, and this will create people to want to invest. We take out the capital gains tax, And you know what? As an investor myself, I'm going to invest in more businesses that will help them grow. So we don't want to tax more. We want to tax less, and we want to take a look at how we can build Canada better for all Canadians and better for Canada as a whole. So I would not increase the GST. Because that doesn't need to be done. But I would also remove all these boutique tax credits for all the very wealthy companies that are taking advantage of them and not paying their fair tax. I'll also make sure that any corporate welfare, as my friend here Dave mentioned, $12 million to Loblaws. They don't need $12 million. Why can't that stay here?
Thank you very much. We'll move on. Candidate number 4.
Well, Stephen Harper understood, as I'm sure most people do, that consumption tax affects the lowest income people the hardest. So GST, taking it down 2%, meant a great deal to the lower income people. Probably doesn't mean as much to some of the folks that have big money, but you can't have a regulated or a generated GST depending on what your income is. But certainly that was a big thing for a lot of people, and to take it back up, as I say, would hurt the lower income. When you want to tax the highest income, you go ahead and do it. The easiest thing for them to do is to leave the country. And that's exactly what happened in England in the 70s. The high income people left England. Margaret Thatcher got a lot of them back by lowering their taxes. But once they leave, they don't come back, and they take their jobs and their factories with them.
We're moving to the next question, sorry.
Good answer, Dave.
Is this for the panel or for an individual?
This is for Mr. Mckenzie.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing up, Mr. Mckenzie. This last spring, outrageously conservative MP Michael Cooper read into the records of the Justice Committee of the House of Commons the manifesto of the mass murderer responsible for the mosque shootings in Christchurch, New Zealand. Mr. Mckenzie, you chose not to vote in favor of removing these hateful words from the committee records. My question is, why do you believe the manifesto of Islamophobic mass murderers should remain in the records of the House of Commons?
Why do you think it should be removed? It was already read into the House. You can't just go in and change things. That manifesto has been broadcast around the world. That was put into the record by Mr. Cooper for a particular reason. It shouldn't be removed.
Can I answer that?
No.
No? Okay,
Question
sorry.
Mr. McKenzie.
So just to clarify, you do believe that the words of Islamophobic mass murderers should regularly be a part of the House of Commons official records then?
In the context that was, but that's not what you're saying.
Thank you very much.
You're changing
You
it.
do believe
Moving on
it.
to the next question, please. Is this for the panel or an individual?
This is for the whole panel.
Thank you.
So my question is, as I hope you all know, Canada has committed to reducing its greenhouse gases by 30% by 2030 based on 2005 levels. And this is a commitment to the global community that we made in Paris. I would like to know one specific policy that each one of your parties is doing, how much that policy will reduce the greenhouse gases, and I would like you to answer the question without mentioning any other parties. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with candidate number 2.
Well, thank you very much for the question. We are going to invest in green energy. We are going to invest in solar, wind, hydroelectric. I'm not sure the exact figure of how much that will bring down carbon emissions, but I'd be happy to look for an exact figure if I can find it for you. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I'd be more than happy to find that. Thank you.
Candidate number 3, the same question.
Thank you. Actually, we're going to do nothing. I get to answer my question you asked. We're doing nothing.
The question is, what specific policy?
She has 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes to answer.
She's not answering my question.
But I am. I'm saying we're not going to do anything on that because the Paris Climate Accord is non-binding. And you should understand that it's non-binding.
I do.
Okay, so that's good, and that's great. So you'll know that there's 100+ dialogues and disciplines under climate in the sciences. So nobody's a climate expert in this. Canada is carbon neutral. We need CO2. We're going to look after our air, our soil, and our waters. And first of all, we're going to make sure Indigenous people get their clean water. That is the most important issue in Canada for our environment. So we will look after that, and we'll let the provinces decide how they're going to implement their environment, and we will respect that because we will work with them. But that's, again, a provincial issue. Please understand the Constitution and where our boundaries lie. And as a federal government, we have to understand that we're a confederate, so we're developed of provinces and we're developed of territories that have their own governing principles. So we will respect the Constitution and encourage our provinces to look after that. Ontario's reduced it by 22% since 2005, so we've done a lot here in Ontario. So I don't think, we're too far off from that goal. Thank you.
We see that.
Okay, enough, please. Let's keep some respect. We want to get through the questions. The constituent at the mic has a right to have the question asked. They have the right to answer it. Let's keep it respectful.
Thank you. We see the real advances in climate change, technology, and environment is not what government does, but what we encourage industry and homeowners to do. So we're looking at putting packages together to encourage that by industry, by their tax advantages, doing the same thing with home ownership. I think that we have to recognize that as a nation, we necessarily can't meet those agreements. It's not going to happen, and I think that's, we're being foolish if we think we can.
Thank you. And the last one, candidate number one, again, the question, please.
Again, I think it goes to say that all Canadians, especially adults, well, now even the children, we do have concerns about our environment. I don't think any of us wants to willfully ruin anything and destroy it. We're always looking on the lookout for new ways of changing things. However, I do feel that our debt load is something that we've got to take care of first. There's so many things that play into it and how much money we can spend. So we'd probably take those things to the table of discussion. And again, I'm sure, just like everybody else, that we are concerned about our air, soil, and water. And we want that, we just don't want any destructive contamination of man-made chemicals. So we don't have anything specific that we would do in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to the next question. Is this for the panel or an individual, please?
This is for the panel.
Thank you.
So overall, with changing of how the workforce is changing with the automation moving forward, we know that people will lose their jobs because of automation. What can we do to help ensure that people are still being able to live within this world with our changing work sector while still being able to move forward financially?
Candidate number 3, we'll start with you to answer the question, please.
Okay, we are actually just working on our automation platform, and I'll have more information for you on that. But on a personal note, I just went into Shoppers today and they had 3 new self-serve checkouts. Okay, if you want to stop automation and you want to keep people working, don't use self-checkouts. A lot of this is the responsibility of our citizens, because as soon as you start using self-checkouts, you're just basically replacing a job, replacing a human. If somebody wants me to use a self-checkout, I basically say, would you like to check me out? Go ahead, you can do so, because I'm giving that person work. Yes, we are probably going to have an issue with automation, and we have to make sure that we're looking after our citizens, and that, that's my personal view. We will have a platform coming out on that shortly, and if you want to check back with me or give me your email, I can definitely answer that so that I can follow my platform on that for you. But I think a lot of it is personal responsibility ourselves, and we have to take responsibility for that. And if you're going to be using the quick checkout at Walmart or McDonald's for ordering, or Wendy's, then you're feeding into automation yourself.
Thank you. Candidate number 4, the same question, please.
Actually, automation in itself does not cost jobs. It creates jobs. There are people that are employed to make those machines in the first place, keep them running, program them. If we don't have automation, if we stayed where we were, we'd be blacksmiths which would not be very productive in the world today. I think what we really need to focus on is having our people educated to operate those, to program them, to build them, and to move forward. And none of those pieces of equipment seem to last very long in a particular job. They end up getting replaced and so on. So automation of its own is not a bad thing. I see where Elizabeth May says she's going to do something with, somebody has to replace something or automation with people, but that's what we're doing now. And you know, we don't have enough people for many of these things. It's we don't have people trained to do the things that need to be done with the automation.
Thank you. Candidate number one, the same question, please.
I think Dave and Wendy have made a lot of really good points, and just we, of course, I don't have our CHP doesn't have a stance on that. I'm just thinking for myself. I've had to some jobs have changed, and I've had to over my lifetime just use resourcefulness. And when one job had closed down for whatever reasons, I would just have to take my own personal responsibility to find a new job. And sometimes that can be gratifying. There's sometimes people are happy to change vocations, so it can be a good thing too. And so I think as Canadians, there will be always jobs available. It just depends on a person's in wanting to work, I suppose, and their resourcefulness to be able to move with the changes within society.
Thank you. Candidate number two.
Well, thank you very much for the question. One thing that could be done is to educate. So, it would be most unfortunate if automation came to, say, a factory and people lost their jobs. Well, let's get those people, find out what their skill setting are, get them back into the workforce, find a job that they are going to be good at, right? And get them back out there as soon as possible and provide the supports and the training that they require to take a new job.
Thank you. Next question, please. Is it for the panel or an individual, please?
This is for the panel.
Thank you.
Hi. So my name is Eden Martin, and I'm asking this question as a representative of Social Planning Council Oxford. So in 2015, all United Nations member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that sets out 17 goals, which are an urgent call for action for developed and developing countries. These goals recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and preservation of our Earth, which is not a small feat. In Oxford County, there are 7,490 people that live in deep poverty, making it nearly impossible for them to meet their basic needs. The good news is that the number of people living in poverty have gone down over recent years, due part and parcel to policy changes and resource flows, such as the Canada Child Benefit, which provides people with a basic income and has been shown to bolster the economy. Many studies project the cost of perpetuating poverty between 150% to 250% of the cost of eliminating it. On behalf of the Social Planning Council Oxford, our question for all candidates is as follows. Is ending poverty a priority for you? And if so, please outline your plan to eliminate poverty.
Thank you for the question. We will start with candidate number 4 to answer the question first, please.
It's a great social justice question from the perspective of the federal government. I'm not sure exactly what you would anticipate we would do. I think first off, we have to have a genuine definition of what poverty is. It changes from time to time, and it changes in location to location. So from a federal government's perspective, it's not, I don't think it's a role that we should be involved in, but we'd certainly be willing to work with others in that regard. The provinces and the municipalities all have social assistance programs that are directly hands-on. But again, I think they suffer from the same issue, is that your definition of poverty and mine might be two different things. And across the country, that is a different thing. Certainly on the reserves, it's different than it is in metropolitan Toronto, and it's different in Woodstock than it is in Toronto. But I agree that it's a serious issue, it's a social issue, and one that we can't turn our backs on.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, the same question, please.
Maybe I should, I'm just wondering if I can answer this with a question. So I did just hear on Hope FM, they were talking about Circles, this new organization. Is that something that is quite helpful? It sounded good from what I heard on the radio for the poor in Oxford County. No? Okay.
Sorry, I just don't want to speak on behalf of that group because I'm not working with them, so I can't really speak.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that gave me hope anyway. I thought, wow, that's wonderful that they're putting forward a program like that to help the poor and, you know, bolster the way they feel about themselves and to get them out there and working. So Canadians, we must always be ready to be able to care for the deserving poor. And again, poverty has there's different types of poverty, I would suppose, that could be defined within the country. Their welfare systems are there and they can run out. But I think when a person is struggling with poverty, there can be many facets to that. It could be perhaps their health, their emotional health, their mental health that's preventing them from being able to go forward, and maybe they just don't even know how to handle their money properly. So it can be a complicated issue with that one. And again, too, like Dave was saying, it's hard to determine, the poverty from the real poverty as well. So yeah, we would totally be concerned with that. I just don't know what our initiatives are, but it's troubling, and there are the deserving poor, and they do need our help. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Poverty is poverty, however you slice it. Sorry, I'm just a bit blindsided by that. The poverty is not being able to make ends meet. Poverty is like not being able to afford your prescription medication, not being able to afford housing, not having access to adequate school or housing or all that stuff. That's all poverty, and that's the same as it would be here, the same how it would be in Toronto, and the same how it would be anywhere across the country. Poverty is not being able to afford the basic necessities of life. That's why in everything that's why in our platform, in the NDP's platform, we are committed to making life more affordable for all working Canadians, for all Canadians. Be it our Pharmacare plan or our Medicare plan, because we expand it to not only Pharmacare, but as I said before, dental, vision, hearing, and mental health care, or our affordable housing strategy, or creating new jobs in a sustainable environment. We are committed to making life more affordable and making sure that the wealthiest in this country pay their fair share of taxes so that the tax burden is not foisted onto everybody else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I'm not saying that poverty is not an issue on our platform, because we're looking at reducing your income tax. So you're paying no tax on the first $15,000. So that's a savings of $529. So that's going to help the poorest. Phasing out supply management will help the poorest, the 20% of our population, with an extra $339 that they won't be spending on dairy, poultry, and eggs. So when you take a look at it, I also like to take a look at the fact that we have to understand that welfare is not a career choice. So where do we go with the people that are on welfare for a lifetime? Okay, we have to look at a little bit of some principles here, like personal responsibility, individual freedom, fairness, and respect. So if we have jobs, like my friend Dave said here, that we have jobs here in Oxford, but we don't have the skills. So why is the community? Because this is a provincial issue. This is not a federal issue. Again, jurisdiction calls for it. We can give guidance of the federal government, but we can't interfere with provincial jurisdiction when it comes to social, economics, and social programs in each province. That's their baby. They have to be responsible, and then it filters down into the municipalities. My office is in the downtown core. I have homeless people every day that walk into my office, and they get a muffin and a coffee. So I think we have to work as a community. Let's put it back here. If you're a community and you're caring about the working poor, are you out there? I'm talking to the mental health officer, the person that drives with the police officers, and he says it is horrendous at what is going on in Oxford County. And I care about Oxford County. I'm walking the streets. I'm talking to these people. I'm trying to figure out what I might be able to do just as myself, as a representative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell me if this is for the panel or individuals, please?
Sorry, this is just for Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
It does concern the New Democrat Party. Yesterday evening, I had the pleasure of attending an event in Hamilton, hosted by PPC, and it was also attended by Antifa. And I'm sure by now everybody has seen the very distressing videos of 3 Antifa thugs badgering and harassing an elderly couple as they tried to cross the street. It is a disgusting display of inhumanism. People around the world have seen this video, and this is now what they think of as Canada. And sorry, they were yelling in their faces, like this close in their faces, Nazi scum off our streets. All right. No, I gotta say, Antifa did actually do the People's Party of Canada a favor recently by outing an actual real neo-Nazi that I ever heard of. And he was summarily ejected from the party and has been severed from the party. What was very interesting yesterday was also that there were a number of NDP volunteers or party members engaged there with Antifa, participating, yelling and screaming also. And so my questions to you, as well as Steelworkers Local 1005. So my question to you, Matt, as a future politician, will you here publicly denounce the extremist terrorist activities of Antifa?
Okay.
And would you, number 2, publicly call on your colleagues, Matt Green and Nick Milanovic, 2 NDP candidates in Hamilton, to summarily dismiss?
Okay, we have to get to the question.
Well, thank you very much for the...
I understand, but
And ask your party to sever ties with Steelworker Local 1005 until they clean up their house.
Well, I can't speak for my fellow colleagues in the Hamilton region. And I certainly can't speak for United Steelworkers Local. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what the local was, but I can't speak for them. 1-3, yeah. What I can, that's all I can say. Is like I can't speak for my NDP colleagues. That's all I can say at this time. Thank you.
the answer to this question is ability. Thank you. Okay, we're going to have one more question, and we're going to call the debate so we can have the closing remarks, please.
My question is to the panel. Our biggest problem is the spiraling out of control debt in this country. What is your party's plan to reduce our deficit?
Just for the panel, sorry.
Yes, the panel.
My next.
We'll start with number 1 to answer the question, please.
The CHP would pay off the debt like a mortgage. It would use the Bank of Canada and stop relying on the international banks and investments. So there would be a plan to pay it off just exactly like a mortgage, and we would utilize the Bank of Canada.
Thank you. Candidate number 2.
Thank you very much for the question. Again, it comes down to priorities. Where are we going to invest and where are we not going to invest? I'm pleased to say that my party's platform invests all in people. Healthcare, housing, all things that, to people, all things that matter to working people in this country. As for working down the deficit, it all is, again, where are we going to invest? What are we going to invest in? I think it's worthwhile to invest in people.
Thank you. Candidate number 3.
Thank you very much for the question. The PPC will balance our budget within 2 years. So we'll stop incurring more debt and more interest. And the way that we do that is we take a look at our books. We're going to take a look and make sure that we stop corporate welfare. That's billions of dollars a year. We're going to make sure that we sell the Trans Mountain pipeline. That's $4.5 billion. We probably won't get that for it, but right now it's a deficit because we're not using it. And when you build that pipeline, you're then creating more, more jobs, and then there's more tax revenue. We will also stop foreign aid. We'll reduce our foreign aid and keep our money here in Canada. That's going to help put everything back into the economy so that we can pay down our debt. So we have to take a look at it at a whole and make sure that our money is staying here in Canada. We also are going to take a look at equalization payments, which are really important because they were created for a reason, and the reason equalization was created was that so that the poorer provinces got a little bit more money from the richer provinces, and so that they could develop their natural resources. Unfortunately, that hasn't worked out that way. We take a look at Quebec that sells their hydro over to New York for a loss, and then they end up getting $20 or $21 billion in equalization payments. So what we're going to make the provinces do is be responsible, give them encouragement to develop their natural resources, and that way those equalization payments are then left at the federal government level to help pay down our important deficits so that we aren't incurring billions of dollars every year in interest. And we're not leaving it for our kids to pay off.
Thank you. Candidate number 4.
Thank you, and I think that's the crux of the whole issue as we go forward in this nation is what we owe and what we're going to add on to it. I think if you heard the Liberal budget come out, the proposed budget, it would add about $100 billion over the next 4 years to our debt that's already at $768 billion. When we look at that, it's the cost of servicing that. So it's necessary that we start to look at where we spend our money, how we spend our money. Do we get value for the CBC? Do we get value for all the money that we send to United Nations? Do we get value for the money that we send to third world countries that doesn't necessarily go to the people on the ground? All of those things. And I think when Wendy's right about the equalization payment, the problem is we can't do that. It has to be, it's a constitutional change that's required. And you may see that Premier Jason Kenney would like to do that, and I think some other provinces would too, but Quebec is going to say no, and so you can't open the Constitution and simply say, we're going to do it with this. It won't work. So we need to federally get our own house in order, get rid of the debt. We're $19 billion in debt this year over and above what the taxes were. But we take in a lot of tax money, but we spend out a lot of money.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into the concluding remarks from each candidate. We're going to start with number 1. Each candidate will be awarded 2 minutes for closing remarks. At 1:30, they'll hear the bell to know they need to start wrapping it up. Candidate number 1 is going to go first.
Thank you. So we're looking here at another election, and every new sunrise is a new beginning, a new opportunity to choose. On voting day, you can choose life, the first human right, family, the building block of society, and freedom, the essence of democracy. Your choice? Okay, so, sorry. Your choice can protect the preborn, the elderly, and the differently disabled. Your choice can defend the rights of parents to raise their children and your right to speak your mind. You have a choice to make. What kind of Canada do you want for your children? Will it still be the true north, strong and free? Will you be able to afford a home and provide for your family? The choices we make, our values, and how we live will equip the next generation. It's time for Christians to vote. I hope that you'll vote for the Christian Heritage Party. Vote Melody Aldred for life, family, and freedom, and for your representative in Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate number 2.
Thank you all again for joining us here this evening. I think it's been a great discussion. I want to thank my fellow candidates for coming tonight, especially the ones that showed up, for putting their name forward. I know it takes a lot of courage to put your name forward, and I think it's a great gift that we live in a robust democracy, and I think we should be proud of that. I know people here are worried about serious issues. Life is getting more and more expensive, and wages aren't keeping up. I'm hearing from people every day at the doorstep from all over this riding who feel that the very richest and the biggest corporations should pay a little more so that the average Canadian isn't falling behind. We've had both liberal and conservative governments in Ottawa that haven't lived up to their promises. They've worked, excuse me, they've worked for you, but they haven't, sorry, choking a bit there. They haven't worked for you, but they have been working around the clock for big corporations and lobbyists. I am in this for you. New Democrats are in it for you. I'm asking for your vote because I'm ready to work hard for this community. I am ready to fight to make life more affordable and improve public services we all need. To bring in universal pharmacare and take bold action on the global issues that face us all. By sending me to Ottawa, I can promise you that you will be electing someone that is always on your side. Thank you, and remember, a vote for Matt is where it's at.
Great. I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening, and I'd like to thank the candidates for being up here. For those of you that might not know, we spend a lot of hours door knocking, talking to people. We don't get to see our families very much. Some of our days are 16 hours long. So we're doing this because we care about the people in our riding and we care about Canada. So please remember that when we knock on your door and say hello, that we've had a long day too. So PPC is putting Canadians and Canada first. Respecting our Constitution, protecting your rights and freedoms, I will fight to honor all Canadians. Our veterans have been denied benefits. This happened because of the Harper government, and to hear Scheer speak to our veterans in PEI recently, I was very sad and upset. He said, "You have been betrayed and you deserve better," and they do. I agree, but the Conservatives were the one that betrayed them, and the PPC will fix this injustice. Scheer then remarked, "It's time for the government to work harder for our veterans' benefits." I find this again a little bit off because it was their party that reduced their benefits. And then Trudeau just made it worse and made it 3 levels of veterans. So that's not fair. So that's a platform item I didn't get a chance to talk about. And another one, for those of you who enjoy the legal ownership of guns, the PPC will respect your rights to ensure that firearm categories be based on function, not on looks or arbitrary political whims, remove inefficiency restrictions with unfair targeted sports shooters. I will end with a statement from Patrick Moore, Greenpeace co-founder and president, or former co-founder. Moore explained how fear and guilt are leveraged by proponents of climate change. Fear has been used all through history to gain control of people's minds and wallets and all else. The climate catastrophe is strictly a fear campaign. Well, fear and guilt. You're afraid of killing your children. You're afraid of killing your children.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Not a good one to end at.
Well, thank you to everyone for being here tonight, and thanks to all the other candidates taking part in tonight's meeting. I would hope everyone found the meeting informative and are better prepared to vote. I would also ask that everyone consider their own wants and desires and the costs for the future. Finally, thank you to the moderator. I think you've done a great job, Brent. Thank you. And the sponsor for this evening's event. On October the 21st, vote Dave Mckenzie.
Thank you. In closing, I would also like to thank the candidates for attending tonight. I would like to say thank you to the Woodstock and Ingersoll District Real Estate Board for all your assistance in this evening's events. I would like to thank all the constituents for participating. I appreciate it. And I would like to thank Rogers TV and the Heart FM for attending tonight as well. As the moderator, Brent Thompson, I say good night and thank you for attending.